Welcome to the World War I podcast, produced by the MacArthur Memorial. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore a wide range of interesting topics related to World War I. This podcast is sponsored by the Ernst and Gertrude Tico Charitable Foundation. There are 125 World War I recipients of the Medal of Honor. One of those recipients was Private Thomas Croft Neibaur of the 167th Infantry Regiment, 42nd Rainbow Division, who received the award for heroism at the Cote de Chatillon in 1918. Neibaur was the first Mormon and the first soldier from Idaho to receive the Medal of Honor. His actions led General John J. Pershing to name him amongst the Immortal Ten of World War I, and yet in a tragic turn of events, in 1939 he returned his Medal of Honor. To discuss Neibaur's World War I service and life, we are joined by Sherman Fleek, author of Place the Headstones Where They Belong, Thomas Neibaur, World War I Soldier. Welcome, sir, and thank you for joining us today.
It's an honor to be here.
So before we get started, tell us a little bit about why you were drawn to the story of Thomas Neibaur.
I'm a soldier myself, 25 years in the Army, both enlisted and officer ranks. And I'm a military historian. Just ended my career on federal service at West Point, 14 years as the command historian at the U.S. Military Academy. So I've been interested in military history all my life. I'm also a Latter-day Saint, a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's about 2004 or 5 before I went to Iraq. I was talking to one of the professors at Brigham Young University who's done a lot of work on veterans. And I asked him, I said, Bob, who was the first LDS to receive the Medal of Honor? He said, oh, that would be Thomas Neibaur from Sugar City, Idaho. So he told me a few things. He says, Sherman, it is a sad, sad story, what he did. And I asked him, so what did he do? He says, well, I don't know all the details, but he mailed and sent his Medal of Honor back to Congress in protest because he couldn't feed his family during the Depression. Well, as a soldier, as a historian, I thought, this is an amazing thing. Why would he do that? I'd ask the question. So I had to find out why. Mm-hmm. So I started researching and doing things and learn more about this amazing story that has an incredible high peak in 1919. And by 1939, Thomas was in the grasp of despair.
Tell us a little bit about his life leading up to World War I.
Thomas's great-grandfather was of Jewish descent, and he was from Berlin. He's educated in Berlin. He's from Koblenz, Germany, on the Rhine River. And as I said, he was Jewish. He took out a medical degree and also dentistry in the University of Berlin. And then he migrated to England in 1835 or so, set up a medical practice there. He married a Jewish woman who was British, and he was one of the first converts in 1838 to the LDS Church when Mormon missionaries started coming to England. He moved to Nauvoo, Illinois. He knew the first leader of the church, Joseph Smith, and he taught Joseph Smith German and Hebrew, which was interesting. So after the death of Joseph Smith in 1844, the Latter-day Saints moved to Utah, became Utah under the leadership of Brigham Young. So the Neibaur clan went along, and he had a practice out there. Then 2 generations later, in 1898, Thomas is born, the 9th child, the first son, to the Neibaur family. So this is just barely across the line in Idaho at Bear Lake. Then in 1904 or so, they moved to a new town that was just springing up north of Rexburg, Idaho, which is north of Idaho Falls and north of Pocatello, if people know their Idaho geography at all. And it became known as Sugar City because they set up a sugar beet factory. So up through the 1950s, one of the greatest producers of sugar in America and other countries were sugar beets. The cane sugar, I think, eventually won out, but there was the Utah-Idaho Sugar Company. So he was there, Sugar City, grew up. He wanted to be a farmer, and the name is Neibaur. Neibaur is actually the German way. It means new farmer, but it got anglicized as names did. But he apparently had a wonderful singing voice, and I've read some of his letters. And back then, they taught young people how to write good letters. And he just loved the outdoors. He loved farming, and he loved music. So that brings us up to the spring of 1917 when World War I began.
Now, what I thought was interesting is that he actually enlists in the Idaho National Guard about a week before that declaration of war in April. So he joins before. Now, do we know what prompted this decision, and what was his early time in the Army like?
He never really explained exactly in any record that we know of why he joined. He probably just thought it was time to get out of the house, to be on his own and try some other things. And also the lure, which happens to a lot of young people. Their parents served, father served, grandfather, so on. And just the opportunity to serve one's nation was there. And of course, the thunder clouds in Europe, which were taking over the United States too.
So he's eventually going to be sent to France. How does he end up with the 42nd Rainbow Division?
The Army, as not all wars, but some wars, was pretty much unprepared for combat operations. The Army, the Navy, and so on, the War Department, Navy Department. So they had to throw things together. The National Guard became a major part of the armed forces in what became known as the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. So there were regular Army divisions, there were National Guard divisions, and then what was called National Army divisions, which were draftees, okay? So when the War Department started organizing these divisions with numbers, and they came out with their patches, which they wore on their shoulders, they were by regular Army, National Guard, or National Army. So Neibaur was in a 2nd Idaho National Guard Regiment, Infantry Regiment, which was redesignated, and they ended up, the Idaho Volunteer Guardsmen were in the 41st Division. So they were regional divisions. It was Idaho, a little bit of Montana, Oregon, and Washington. Like the 40th Division to the south was California, and that's how they were organized. So as these divisions were being organized and the regiments from those three different components and the draftees going to be marshaled in, the War Department had to figure out where to rename, redesignate all these units and the orders and the nomenclatures. One person involved that was Major Douglas MacArthur, and he was the first public affairs officer in the United States Army, and he worked for Newton Baker, the Secretary of War. Well, apparently, as they were filling out the last few units, there were 4 regiments that were unassigned, and they were from 4 different states. So they became the 165th, which is out of New York, which was the old Fighting 69th, which is very popular in the Civil War, the Irish regiment. And then you have the 166th, which is out of Ohio. And then the 167th of Alabama, National Guardsmen, and the 168th of Iowa. So that was the 4 regiments. So the divisions back then were called square divisions, 4 regiments square. World War II, there were 3 regiments. So triangular, World War II, square. So 2 regiments, 1 brigade, and then the 2 more regiments, another brigade. So it became the 83rd and 84th brigades of the 42nd Division. If you take 2 times 42, what do you get? 84. It's that simple.
Right.
It is really that simple. All right. So that was the 42nd. It became known as the Rainbow because what we believed happened was MacArthur made this statement in front of Secretary Baker that there are soldiers and draftees, and so they were all mixed up. There were regular Army,
Right.
there were draftees, and National Guard individuals in all these different units. And MacArthur said, this unit will comprise of 28 states, like a rainbow across the land. Now, we don't know if it's a park rule, but anyway, it's a great story, so let's use it. So Neibaur gets over to France with the 41st, and it becomes a depot division, meaning they're going to take soldiers and fill up the other units from that unit. And they'll work doing all the logistic stuff. And no one wants to go there, especially the commanders, and be in the logistics in the rear. So Neibaur was taken from the 41st and put in with the 167th, all these wonderful guys with a southern accent from Alabama. Okay?
Right.
And he's an Idaho spud farmer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how he ended up in the 42nd Division.
Okay. Now, he's going to receive the Medal of Honor for actions at the Cote in October 1918. But does he see combat before then?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I took a quote from one of his letters, and this is what he wrote about a week before that action in October. But he went into the line along with, the 42nd in March of 18, and then they endured the Ludendorff spring offensives, the four major offensives. And so he was involved in all those campaigns and got credit for that. But he wrote this home to his family. I'll tell you, folks, this war sure is hard on a man, and nobody but a real man could stand it. One night a man is sleeping in a good warm place, and the next night he's sleeping in a shell hole with nothing for cover. So trench life in World War I was not fun, and he saw that, and he experienced it, and he was gassed a couple times during the spring and summer of 1918. So yeah, he had been in the front lines along with the rest of the 42nd.
Tell us about his actions at the Cote de Chatillon.
Leading up to the major fight on the 16th of October, there's a couple of interesting things that involving the Alabama 167th and Brigadier General Douglas MacArthur, who is the brigade commander over the 84th Brigade. So a couple days out, this is the Meuse-Argonne offensive, and it had slowed down, and the Germans had been fighting quite well, unlike in the Saint-Mihiel a month earlier, where they were retreating when the Americans attacked. But now they had a very strong, determined defense. And there were the three strong lines named after the three witches in a Wagner play, Richard Wagner. And one was Brunhilde, Gilsia, and Kriemhilde, okay? And so they were very strong defensive lines. They'd been there for some time. So it was really tough. And MacArthur and the 42nd and the AEF was bogged down. And so the officers, the leaders, General Pershing, General Summerall, the rest of them became very nervous. They wanted to push this offensive on. So there was on the day before, on the 15th, MacArthur issued an order to the 167th that they were going to do a night attack with bayonets and no cartridges in their rifles, their 1903 Springfields. Well, that is kind of an interesting decision. And what happened was the lieutenant colonel, who's the XO or the deputy commander of the regiment, a guardsman, okay, Lieutenant Colonel Walter Barr, when he got that message, he went to MacArthur's headquarters, and it's one of those truth to power situations. And he explained, Sir, if we do this, we're going to lose a lot of men. We can do better during the day. Why go in with just bayonets? Now, MacArthur, in my opinion, this is my opinion, he's a student of history, and he saw how Alexander Hamilton took the 10th Redoubt in the American Revolution at Yorktown with a night attack with fixed bayonets. Well, you can do that during the American Revolution, but with machine guns and gas and everything, World War I, it's a little different thing. So MacArthur backed down, which is interesting. That same evening, General Charles Summerall showed up at his headquarters, and he stuck his finger into MacArthur's chest. Give me Cote de Chatillon, or give me a list with 5,000 names on it. And MacArthur was just stunned. But he said, according in his memoirs, that he says, we'll take it, or my name will be at the head of the list. So here we are, a little bit of dramatics, which happens in combat, that occurred. So on the 16th of October, 1918, they asked for volunteers. So anyone's ever been in the military knows you never volunteer for anything. But Thomas Neibaur did. And so he was the gunner. This is a small little automatic weapons team of three soldiers. Neibaur's the gunner. And then there's a spotter or observer looking for the enemy and helping lead the rounds into the enemy. And then you have a loader. So they had the choke shot machine guns. This is basically a piece of junk. All right.
Yeah. We could do a whole podcast on that, right?
Yeah. It was a 8mm Parabellum. It had a big banana clip, and it was notoriously for jamming and getting sand in there. It was just really an awful weapon. All right. So that's what they had. We don't have the name of the one blonde-haired soldier. The loader was named Boscaro, and he was a New Yorker. That's all that we know, or what I have learned about him. So here are two soldiers lost to history. So they volunteer. And the idea was there were 2 or 3 German machine gun emplacements about 200 or 300 yards away on higher ground on a spur coming down from the Cote de Chatillon. Now, a good share of the hill had been taken by the 16th, but not all of it. So this is what we call the mopping up operation. So they had gotten through the very difficult defensive works, and now these are other positions that the Germans had put in what we'd probably call a hasty defense today. And so they looped around they're in the south, they're facing north, and they loop around to the east, these 3 men, to outflank the German machine guns positions, and they are seen, and the Germans open up on them. Within 2 or 3 minutes, the blonde-haired soldier, name unknown, is killed. The other soldier from New York, Boscano, he is wounded, but he dies within minutes or so on. And Neibaur is wounded 2 or 3 times in the right leg. It's kind of interesting. So here they are, and this is in full view of their battalion of the 162nd, all right? They're in the M Company, 3rd Battalion. And so that's what's going on. So they're offering some covering fire from the trenches or from their positions, and that's what happens. So there's about 50 Germans in the area, and Neibaur's thinking, I'm wounded, but I can move. And he had already fired up 2.5 clips, and his machine gun jams. Imagine that. So he makes the quick decision to see if he could crawl, stumble, run, whatever, down off the hill to friendly lines. And that's what he does. So he starts charging down, and he is hit another time with a magic bullet entered into his right hip in the back, and it embedded itself on the other side of his spine, going through his organs, his body, abdomen, without damaging any organs at all. And that bullet stayed with him the rest of his life. So that knocked him out. He fainted, and he was there on the battlefield. And he wrote later in one of his accounts that he thinks he may have been there about a half an hour or so. When he comes to, there's Germans in the area right there. They're taking covering. So there was a lot of foxholes, and they have the earth piled out. So there's little berms and little hills everywhere. And that's where he was. And he realizes his personal weapon was a pistol, the .45 caliber pistol, a Browning automatic, 6-7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. And the pistol was laying over there, 1911, I'm sorry, so 1911, was laying over there on the ground. And he decides to hustle over and get it. So he does. And he grabs it. And they see him. Now, why the Germans did what they did, we'll never know. But about 15 of them charged him with bayonets. They didn't shoot at him. And one by one, boom, 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 he shot and killed 4 and dropped. The others threw down their rifles and surrendered to him. And so this is where the story gets personal with me. So my wife's father was from that area in Idaho. And Neibaur came to his 3rd grade class in the 30s in uniform to speak to this class of kids that are 8, 10, 12 years old. You know, my father-in-law's there. Okay, Stanton Johnson. All right, he passed on a few years ago, World War II veteran. And he explained how Neibaur took the pistol, and so he doesn't know German. They don't really know English. And he puts a pistol up to one of the Germans' heads, said, carry me down. And they did. If you act off something, I'm going to, shoot you.
Wow. So he has them carry him down off the hill. Oh, my gosh.
And his soldiers, his battalion down below, is watching all this, seeing it. Okay, that's why they wrote up a Medal of Honor citation for it. So Neibaur explains his story to these school kids. My father-in-law's there, and he starts crying. He gets upset. It's very emotional for him. He starts crying, and these young kids call him a crybaby.
Oh, my.
Yeah, that happens. It's amazing. Vietnam veterans going to schools. It's an interesting dynamic in psychology. So anyway, they come down off the hill. Then for the next hour and a half, Neibaur, wounded, could hardly walk, leads these 11 captured POW Germans about a mile and a half to an aid station. He goes to find his company commander, and it's another commander that he went to the wrong command post. And what do I do with these soldiers, with these POWs? Where'd you get them? Well, I captured them. You captured them by yourself? Yes, sir. You did that? Yes, I did. And I got my pistol. And he says, well, young man, that's outstanding. But they don't relieve him, and he has to march him back about a half a mile, wounded, to the aid station, the POW collection point. So that's what happened that day.
Wow. So Douglas MacArthur was chief of staff, as we've said, of the 42nd earlier in the war, and then commander of the 84th Infantry Brigade that included Neibaur's 167th. So do we know if Neibaur ever encountered MacArthur? And second question, did MacArthur play any role at all in the Medal of Honor process for him?
I have not seen any record or anyone else that MacArthur or anything with my research on General MacArthur had any association, meeting, or interaction at all with Thomas Neibaur. However, his Medal of Honor recommendation would naturally flow through MacArthur's office, and he would have signed off on it. He would have endorsed it as it went up. I mean, this happened quickly. Neibaur knew about his Medal of Honor by the end of November.
Right. It was fast.
It was quick. It was very quick. But the one person he did get to know fairly well and kept in touch for many years was a guy named John J. Pershing, the commander of the AEF. So that is interesting.
Where and when is he actually awarded the Medal of Honor?
Medal of Honor. There was, so the end of the war, the armistice was on the 11th day, November, 11th month, 11th hour. And Thomas Neibaur, of course, had been in the hospital in far western France, and he had had 2 or 3 surgeries. And then he received updates that he was going to receive this medal. He wrote home about it. So I was able to see the 24 letters that he wrote from his time in the military overseas, one he typed. So a typewriter, they've been around for, several decades, but they weren't a high school laptop thing. Everyone had a typewriter, and the typing wasn't very good, but he did type it. and they used the old Victory stationery. So then they decided, someone on staff, Pershing himself, to have an award ceremony at Sherman, which is the headquarters of the AEF, which I visited. And so there were 17 members, soldiers, officers, and enlisted to receive the Medal of Honor that day in the snow. It was February 9th, 1919. And Pershing awarded it himself, went down the line, they read the citation, and so on and so forth. And so that's how it happened. So he was standing on his feet by then. He was still in some pain. And there was concern whether he'd make the ceremony or not. That's a couple of letters back and forth with General Pershing. And he took great interest in Neibaur.
Did he get to spend much time at Chaumont? Was it a couple weeks or a week, or was he just there for the day and then gone?
I don't have any information how long he was there. I know he shipped out by March, and then it's a 3 to 4 week voyage home. And then he came to Norfolk to one of the hospitals here, and he visited another hospital. And then he went to Fort D.A. Russell in Wyoming. That's where he was processed out, in Fort D.A. Russell.
Does he continue, though, to have some medical issues related to those wounds?
Thomas Neibaur, probably a good man and a decent person, but whenever he started drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes, it became a thing with him all his life. And so he had been gassed a couple times, so that didn't help at all. So he had these kinds of challenges before him. And so that's, he's still a young man. He's only 19 years old when all this happens, but those things creep up on him. He, of course, had the bullet that was in his spine, and his leg was not 100% cured. So those are some of the aspects he had to face in life.
Yeah, those wounds lingered in many ways. So in the introduction, I mentioned that he returns his Medal of Honor in 1939. Can you tell us about that and really what happens to him after the war? I think most people have this idea that a soldier is very heroic in combat. You receive the Medal of Honor. Your life must be absolutely golden and set after that. So what happens in this case?
Receiving the Medal of Honor is a life-changing experience, even then. Even more so now. There's so much more emphasis on it. I mean, Pershing awarded the Medal of Honor to him in France, and that's happened a lot up through even World War II, that commanders in the field would do that. But now it is a big White House thing with the President of the United States, as well it should be. So, yes, he was a hero. And when he arrived home on the train, the end of May of 1919, at Sugar City, Idaho, there were about 10 to 12,000 people greeting him. Sugar City is about 400 people. It's probably a third of the whole Snake River Basin, from Pocatello and Blackfoot and Idaho Falls and Rexburg. There, they came up by train, buggy, whatever, 1919, to see Thomas Neibaur. There were high school bands. The governor was there, the lieutenant governor, and all these other dignitaries, the adjutant general, the general commanding the Idaho National Guard. His great uncle was a senior official in the LDS Church, came up from Salt Lake. And so, yes, he was wined and dined. He was the hero. 20 years later, he's almost on the streets, homeless, 20 years later. And it's a sad story, which I will share now. Okay, so because of his injuries and everything, it was hard for him to do work. He played in a band for a while. Then he met a really good, stable, older woman, 4 years, Lois, and they married, and they had 9 children. And he worked at the sugar beet factory, all right? Just because a soldier receives the Medal of Honor doesn't mean they have the greatest education in the world, or the best public speaker, or they can run General Motors or be a top official here and there. Some of them have that ability. Audie Murphy became a movie star and so on. And other generals, well, MacArthur, look what he did, but not these soldiers. They have this one day or these 2 or 3 days where they do an incredible feat. And like Sergeant York, then they have to go back and earn a living. And that's what happened to Thomas Neibaur. I will just say right now, as a historian, as an American citizen, we did a terrible job taking care of our veterans coming home from World War I, the Great War. And we learned, because after World War II, we had the GI Bill. We learned our lesson. Sadly, we didn't learn that in World War I. So Thomas was right in the throes of that. He's working in the sugar beet factory. He gets his arm caught in a sugar beet machine, a cutter, and they have to disassemble it to get his arm out. So his leg is messed up. He's got this spinal problem, and now his arm is injured, and he's drinking and doing other things, and his life just starts sliding. 9 children, 2 older girls who both marry eventually, and then there's 7 sons. Of those 7 sons, 3 of them died at early age by just terrible, tragic accidents that is just so sad. So in 1925, they're still in Sugar City, and Thomas Phil wandered out, is about a year and a half old, wandered out in the backyard, slipped between 2 planks, and fell into a cesspool and drowned. His older sister, Marion, who's about 5 years old, comes in the house. Mommy, I see a little baby in a hole. So she goes out there and finds the boy drowned in the cesspool. Gordon Keith, I don't know the medical term, but he has no feeling in his body. He can't sense hot and cold. There's some people like that. So again, they're in Sugar City. It's 1933. He's cold. He crawls up on the stove. He crawled up on the stove, and he gets burned terribly. He doesn't realize he's being burned, and he dies 2 days later. And then they moved to Boise, searching for work. Now, this is right in the heart of the Depression, and he can't find a job. He's getting the Medal of Honor stipend. A lot of people don't realize this, but recipients of the Medal of Honor, even today, receive a stipend or it's not really a retirement, a pension. You could call it a pension of a certain amount of money. Back then, it started out as $25 a month. And I think by the 30s, late 30s, it was around $125 a month. So they're in Boise, scratching out a living, and Doyle is killed. He's 4 years old. He wanders out in the street in Boise. He's run over by a car. So there was an attempt by well-wishers and friends and veterans and people who loved him, and everyone liked him. They just thought he had... So this is LDS community. Latter-day Saints supposedly are not supposed to drink and smoke. And then they have the hero of the Medal of Honor, with the alcohol problem. That didn't help. And so he is just sliding. And finally, some well-wishers decided to send a letter and a request to Senator William Borah of Idaho. And he puts forth a bill or a line item thing in one of the bills to have Thomas Neibaur promoted to the rank of major in the regular army, and the next day be listed on the retired list and receive a pension, which would be about $2,500 a year. And so that was what Senator Borah tried. But the Secretary of War, Harry Woodring, very rightly and correctly said, Thomas Neibaur, along with other Medal of Honor recipients, we gave them, the government recognized them for the great valor that they performed in their service. He did not do a full retirement. It's not fair for those who stay in the service that this soldier with a year or two of service gets a full retirement, even though we've already recognized him with the highest award, and he is getting a pension. So when Thomas found out that this line proposal didn't even make it out of committee, he organized a press conference, and we have a picture of it, and in Boise, and several newspaper reporters and other people came, and he explained that if Secretary of War Woodring doesn't care about what he did that day, what he sacrificed, his valor, then neither do I. And he mailed his Medal of Honor, his Purple Heart, and Croix de Guerre and Legion d'Honneur and other awards back to Congress, to Senator Borah. He never saw him again. About the same time, so about 2 or 3 days later, a friend of his talked to the governor, and they offered him a job for about $225 a month, which is not bad money back then, to be a night watchman in the Boise State Capitol building, which he did for a couple of years. By 1941, he was so crippled and in such bad health with emphysema, his lungs and everything, that he went into the Veterans Hospital in Walla Walla, Washington, and he died there. His 4 remaining boys were sent to a orphanage in Michigan. Never saw him again. And his wife, Lois, had died about a year or two earlier, just worked herself to death at the age of 47.
It's an incredibly tragic story. Why do you think we don't know Neibaur like we maybe know Sergeant York or other ones? Why was he not in our kind of popular imagination of who fought this war?
That's a good question. And I don't know if it's the Greek gods of fate or mystery, how it happens. Sergeant York, capturing 121 German soldiers, and which was a huge thing. Of course, there was 8 or 10 guys with him helping him out, but he still did an incredible thing that day. So, yeah, it's why do some people get recognition above others? Well, no one else was tackling Neibaur's story. There were family members, and they had documents. They had this, and they felt strongly about it. And they had there was all these things that they had done locally, newspaper articles every few years about Neibaur. And they even named a city park in Sugar City. And I saw it the first time in about 2006 after I got back from Iraq. And it was like a 2x8 weathered with his name painted on it, weathered. You could hardly read it, and it was rotting. And I'm there with a local historian friend of mine. I said, surely we can do better than this. So in about a year and a half time, they raised $8,000 or $10,000 through these local people. Of course, I'm where am I? I'm at Walter Reed as the historian there. And they put a monument in the ground in 2008, Sugar City, Idaho, for Thomas Neibaur. So, recognition. I think this would be a fabulous movie. I really do. And I didn't write the book just for fame or anything like that, but it's just a tremendous story that needed to be told.
No, it certainly is, and I'm very glad you did. Any other final thoughts?
As we learned our lessons from World War I, finally the government consolidated in the 30s under FDR 2 or 3 different veterans agencies. There were 2 or 3. There was one with the War Department. There was the Old Soldiers and Sailors Home. Maybe you've heard of that. There were those. And then all these veterans hospitals and invalid clinics and so on. And they consolidated under a brigadier general from the war named Frank Hines from Utah. And he was the first administrator. But we learned, and then, of course, we know about Douglas MacArthur and the Bonus March in 1932.
Right. And Neibaur's not part of that.
No,
right?
But he had those same feelings, I think physically, if he could have, maybe he was actually working that. Yeah, he was. He was still working some. But
I think something you said earlier, though, is I hadn't thought about before, the education. They didn't have access when they came home to these education opportunities that people who serve can have today. And I wonder if that
GI Bill,
all of those men that we see in those pictures of the Bonus March, I wonder, had they had more opportunities like that, would that have been? But then again, you look at the Great Depression, and even if you'd had some of that education, it might not have worked. So,
it's just
something to think about.
Just the way events are. I mean, after American Revolution, the new fledgling United States gave acreage to veterans, parcels of land. The Civil War, again, there were pensions and so on, and for the widows, wasn't much, but it was worth it back then. And there was some pensions and so on after World War I, but then they passed this law, I think in 1924, that in 1945 they would receive up to $1,000. how much time you had in Europe and anything else. But they needed it now in the 30s. And so, yeah, we learned our lesson.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. The book is Place the Headstones Where They Belong, Thomas Neibaur, World War I Soldier. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.